Tonight, you will lie down, you will close your eyes, and then your brain will betray you. It will hand you a list of everything you said wrong in 2019. It will replay a conversation you haven't thought about in months. It will invent a problem you don't even have yet and spend 40 minutes solving it in the dark. You've been awake for 16 hours. Your body is exhausted. And yet, the moment the lights go out, something turns on. Why does this happen? Why does the mind that went quiet during a boring meeting suddenly become the most productive storyteller in your life the second you need it to stop? The answer isn't stress. It isn't anxiety. It's something far older, far stranger, and it has been running inside you since long before you had a bed to lie in. Your brain has a system. Researchers call it the default mode network. Psychologist Marcus Reichel first mapped it in 2001 when he noticed something that made no sense. When subjects in brain scans were told to rest, to do nothing, certain regions of the brain didn't calm down. They lit up. The brain, when idle, wasn't resting at all. It was working harder than when it was focused on a task. The default mode network is the brain's background process. It runs when external demands drop, and its job, its ancient, relentless, evolutionary job, is to think about you, about other people, about the future, about the past, about every social thread you are currently weaving. The moment the outside world goes quiet, it takes the stage. This is why silence is so loud. During the day, your attention is bouncing between tasks, screens, conversations, noise. Your brain's executive system is active. The default mode network is suppressed. It doesn't get a turn. But the moment you pull the blanket up, close your eyes, and remove every external stimulus, the default mode network finally gets what it has been waiting for all day. It gets the room to itself, and it has a lot of material to work through. Here's the thing you need to understand about your brain. It is not optimized for your comfort. It is optimized for your survival. And for 99% of human history, survival meant one thing above everything else: social belonging. Evolutionary anthropologist Robin Dunbar has spent decades studying the relationship between brain size and group living. His research suggests the human neocortex, the thinking, planning, remembering part of your brain, grew to the size it did primarily to manage the social complexity of living with other humans, not to solve math, not to build tools, to track relationships, to remember who said what, who owes whom, who is a threat, who is an ally, and what you need to do tomorrow to stay in good standing with your tribe. That is the engine running at night. That is what the default mode network is processing in the dark. You replay the conversation from lunch because your brain isn't done with it. It is running a social simulation. It is asking, did that land the right way? Did you misread the tone? Are you safe? You are not anxious without reason. You are running software that kept your ancestors alive. But here is where it gets stranger. There is a second system involved, and it has been largely misunderstood. Your body runs on a circadian clock, a roughly 24-hour biological rhythm driven by light exposure and regulated by the release of hormones. When light fades, your pineal gland begins releasing melatonin, signaling to the body that night is approaching. But melatonin doesn't knock you out. It doesn't force sleep. It shifts your physiology toward readiness for sleep. There is a difference. Sleep researcher Matthew Walker, author of extensive studies on human sleep architecture, describes what happens in the brain's prefrontal cortex at night. This region, responsible for rational thought, emotional regulation, and logical override, loses efficiency as melatonin rises. It becomes less able to suppress the emotional, memory-driven, socially focused systems further back in the brain. In other words, your inner editor clocks off, and everything it was keeping quiet gets louder. The memory system known as the hippocampus becomes more active. Emotional tagging, the process by which the brain assigns emotional weight to recent events, intensifies. This is why a small awkward moment from Tuesday can feel catastrophic at midnight. It isn't catastrophic. Your brain has simply removed the filter that was keeping it in proportion. You are not more irrational at night. You are more honest, more unguarded, more ancient. But let's go back even further. Your ancestors did not sleep the way you do. Historian Roger Ekirch published a landmark study in 2001, drawing on over 500 years of pre-industrial historical records, diaries, court documents, medical texts, literature, and found overwhelming evidence that before artificial lighting, humans didn't sleep in one continuous 8-hour block. They slept in two distinct phases, separated by an hour or two of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night. This in-between period was not insomnia. It was not dysfunction. It was a recognized, named state. People called it the watch. They prayed, they had sex, they talked to their partners, They thought, and then they went back to sleep. The brain's middle of the night restlessness, the wakefulness, the rolling thoughts, the vivid mental replaying may not be a glitch. It may be a feature, a biological schedule that modern life has simply compressed into something it was never designed to fit. You are not broken for thinking at night. You are running ancient code in a modern machine. Now consider what happens in the body during those moments of nighttime thoughts spiraling. Cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, follows its own circadian rhythm. It bottoms out around midnight, then begins rising again in the early morning hours to prepare your body for waking. If stress activates the cortisol system out of sequence, it can spike cortisol in the middle of the night, waking you up and priming the brain for threat detection. Psychologist Allison Harvey at UC Berkeley has researched what she calls the sleep interfering cognitive processes, the mental behaviors that keep people awake. Her work identifies a key loop. Worry triggers arousal, arousal prevents sleep, and the failure to sleep becomes its own source of worry, feeding the loop. The mind doesn't just wander at night, it becomes recursive. It watches itself not sleeping, and then it worries about that. But here's what Harvey's research also found. The content of nighttime thought is not random. It clusters. It almost always involves unresolved personal concerns, social relationships, and anticipated future events. It never spirals around trivia. It circles only the things your brain has flagged as unfinished. Your brain is not tormenting you for sport. It is surfacing exactly what it believes you haven't finished processing. The thought that won't leave is a flag, something your system is trying to close. So what do you do with this? The worst thing you can do, according to almost every sleep researcher who has studied this, is try to force the thoughts to stop. Thought suppression, the act of consciously trying not to think about something, reliably increases its frequency. The brain interprets the suppression attempt as evidence that the thought is dangerous and begins monitoring for it more carefully. You end up thinking about the thing you are trying not to think about more than you did before you tried to stop. Instead, the brain needs what it's actually asking for: completion, acknowledgement, closure. Studies conducted by psychologist Baumgartner and colleagues on the Zeigarnik effect, the brain's tendency to ruminate on incomplete tasks far more than completed ones, suggests that even a partial plan, written down and externalized, can reduce nighttime rumination. The brain doesn't need the problem solved. It needs to know the problem has been seen, logged, handled by morning you. Once you write it down, a signal fires. This has been registered. You can let it go. This is why the most productive thing you can do before bed is not meditate, not stretch, not optimize your sleep environment, though those help. The most productive thing is to give your brain 5 minutes to say what it's trying to say. Write the worry down. Write the unfinished thought. Write the name of the person whose reaction you're still turning over. Externalize the loop. Your brain has been running this process in the dark for 300,000 years. You are not the first person to stare at the ceiling and wonder why silence is so loud. You are the continuation of every ancestor who lay in the dark, listening to the fire die down, running social simulations, rehearsing tomorrow's hunt, replaying today's conversation at the waterhole. The middle of the night wakefulness, the unfinished thoughts that float to the surface when the world goes quiet. Tonight, when you lie down and your brain hands you the list, the unfinished conversations, the things you should have said, the quiet worry about next week, know this: that is not your brain failing. That is your brain doing exactly what 300,000 years of evolution built it to do: keeping watch, running the simulation, making sure you're ready, the lights are off, and you are still here, still thinking, still impossibly alive. That's not a flaw. That's the feature that got you here.